When T.S. Eliot was an undergraduate at Harvard University, he read a book that changed his life. By accident, he had stumbled across a copy of Arthur Symons's The Symbolist Movement in Literature. One particular chapter captured Eliot's attention. It was devoted to Jules Laforgue, a minor French poet of the 19th century. Eliot was so impressed by Symons's description of Laforgue that Eliot ordered the complete works from Paris, even though he didn't speak French well at all. The strange thing about Laforgue's poetry is that it was very different from the kind of poetry that Eliot was writing at the time. Laforgue was chatty, informal, conversational, and sometimes bitterly sarcastic. Eliot, by contrast, was a shy and rather conventional young man. Proper manners were very important to the Eliot family, who had descended from a proud line of Boston Brahmins. Once, as a boy, Eliot had been chided by his mother for bringing the vulgar expression, okay, into the home. And now, here he was as an undergraduate, reading Laforgue and absorbing a poetic style and content that would have been considered offensive to his family's sense of propriety. And so Eliot did what many quietly devious adolescents do. He bought himself a notebook where he could experiment in this new style away from the judging eyes of his elders. Eliot published a few of those poems from the notebook right away, but most of its contents have not been public until recently, with the publication of Inventions of the March Hare, where you can find both the published and the unpublished poems. Here you'll find early drafts of Eliot's most famous early poems, like Portrait of a Lady or The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. When it was first published in 1915, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock created a small sensation, and it has become, since, one of the most beloved poems of the 20th century. It's odd to think that the poem is so popular because it's not a love song at all. It's a poem about loneliness, alienation, and the lies that we tell in order to hide such terrible knowledge from ourselves. In the notebook, Eliot started to think big about what poetry can do, and such a process is inevitably a messy one. Eliot started to allow into his poetry all kinds of influences in addition to the serious literature he was reading. Slang and colloquial speech make their appearances in the notebook poems, as well as other elements of popular culture, like snatches of ragtime lyrics or skits from vaudeville shows. One of the poems in the notebook is entitled The Triumph of Bullshit, or, as one of my Southern friends pronounces it, she's an Eliot scholar too, The Triumph of Bullshit. Eliot's use of that word happens to be the first recorded instance of it in the English language. With the notebook poems, we are miles away from the polite poems about wilting flowers that Eliot was writing as a teenager. But Eliot was not primarily interested in shocking. He was looking for new ways of writing and feeling. Under the influence of Charles Baudelaire, yet another 19th century French poet, Eliot started to write about life in the inner city, using unpleasant images of garbage, filth, and brokenness. No one was writing poetry like this in English, which is why Eliot had to look across the Atlantic for guidance. By writing about urban decay and the alienation of city life, Eliot was sounding for the first time one of the grandest themes of his mature poetry, the problem of human suffering. Consider these lines from First Caprice in North Cambridge, one of the first poems to be written in the notebook. The setting is North Cambridge, a poor district near the Harvard campus where Eliot would sometimes go slumming. Bottles and broken glass, trampled mud and grass. Most of the poem is like this, a list of images and hardly any verbs. After many such descriptions of poverty and brokenness, the final line comes as a shock. Oh, these minor considerations. This jarring last line isn't integrated into the poem. It records the speaker's suspicion of sentimentality, and so he dismisses his entire poem with a sarcastic jab. How Eliot was eventually able to weld together his warring instincts of sarcasm and seriousness, his inner Laforgue and his inner Baudelaire, is one of the achievements of the Notebook. When Eliot died in 1965, he was under the impression that his youthful notebook had long ago been lost or destroyed. We're lucky it was found, though. Inventions of the March Hare is by turns funny, surprising, and heartbreaking. A bumpy record of a young poet chafing against the constrictions of family, religion, and culture. With the Notebook poems, T.S. Eliot leaves his adolescent scribblings behind and turns himself into a first-rate poet.